The year of 1848 is perhaps the most important in European history. It was a period of chaos, as practically every nation in Western Europe suffered massive unrest. The goal of the revolutions was to get rid of the dysfunctional monarchies and create states based on shared language, religion and heritage. So what if our revolution succeeded? How would the European continent look and what would change? The ideas of creating a state based on shared language, religion and heritage were introduced to most of Europe nearly 40 years prior to that, when Napoleon Bonaparte was invading the European continent. He created the Confederation of the Rhine and created some unified Italian states. After he was defeated, his ideas of forming countries based on language continued to live on and even to thrive. Most of these rebellions failed, but a few succeeded. As I just mentioned, the Italian states rebelled and wished for a unified Italian-speaking state. Same situation was in Germany. Both of these rebellions failed. Denmark, on the other hand, ceased to be an absolute monarchy, with the people gaining more power in a new constitutional framework, so their rebellion was successful. A similar situation happened in the Netherlands, with the people getting representative democracy. In France, the monarchy was overthrown in favor of a republic, where Napoleon III became the first president, yet another successful French Revolution. The most important revolution of 1846 is the Hungarian Revolution, which deserves its own video. Galicia also rebelled and tried to get away from Austria's grip. Both of these revolutions were crushed. Greater Poland, which is the Posen region in Prussia, rebelled, but they were unsuccessful. The Principality of Wallachia also managed to get rid of their prince, but due to many coups after that, they returned to a similar situation prior to the revolution. Ireland briefly rebelled, but Britain won the first engagement and the young Irelanders settled for a status quo. The island was suffering from the Great Famine, which was a big kind of punishment. Spain was having a brief civil war during the crisis, the Second Carlist War, where the liberals were victorious and the Carlists were defeated. The United Kingdom, the Ottoman Empire and the Russian Empire were largely unaffected by the revolutions, so they would be among the strongest nations in Europe after the revolutions have concluded. Let me demonstrate that point by going over to Austria's situation. The video's narrative suggests that Hungary and Galicia would be successful in their own revolutions, so they would break free. This would allow for the Ottomans to win some wars and territory, same for the Russians, but I'm getting ahead of myself. France and Denmark already won their revolutions, so there is no point in discussing them. It should go without saying, but for all revolutions in 1848 to succeed, it's close to impossible. I'll try my best to give you a plausible way on how this could happen, but it's still very unlikely. Let's forget all about realism and look at an interesting and unique scenario. I suggest that the conditions that made the people rise in 1848 to be even more brutal, so these people are even more determined to fight. The revolutions happened because the people were dissatisfied with the monarchies and wanted direct rule. There was also the potato famine ongoing in all of Europe, not just Ireland, so millions starved to death. Industrialization also took away millions of jobs for the people, who also later starved to death. If these conditions are worse, people can rebel more effectively. For example, the United Kingdom crushed the Irish rebellion the first time they engaged in fighting, so according to the video's title, let's change that. Ireland has no hopes of breaking free, but they can impose some of their demands, these being democratic reforms. Ireland would have a form of self-governance, which would satisfy most of the Irish. The United Kingdom most likely reform, as Scotland, Wales and other colonies would want the same. This would lead to an overall weaker United Kingdom, who would be wary of adding new territories to their country. Is this realistic? Most likely not, but the topic of the video is extremely unrealistic either way, so let's move on. The German states would manage to unite themselves, but with an exception, this being Greater Poland or Posen province, which would also rebel. The Germans can either focus on putting down the rebellion or to unite with each other. I assume that if some were given the choice, they would prefer to unite. This Germanic union would be a bit different than the Germany that unified in 1871 for several reasons. Most likely it's going to be a stronger German confederation, with all the smaller states remaining sort of independent, with their own monarchies continuing to rule them. The United German State would however act as one when it comes to foreign policy and military. This Germany wouldn't be as strong as you may think, as again internally they would look like this, quite disjointed. To be clear, a German confederation sort of existed as a replacement of the Holy Roman Empire, but I'm not talking about that. This is possible to happen as the main revolution in the German states is called the March Revolution, and it took place in South and West Germany. The East would be preoccupied dealing with the Polish uprising. The main demands for the German uprisings were German national unity, freedom of the press and freedom of assembly, all of which would be achieved. The Greater Polish Uprising would also succeed due to the Germans being busy unifying with each other. The First Schleswig War happened also during the revolutions, and in it, Denmark managed to defend their subject of Schleswig to prevent them from joining Germany. Historically, the Germans in Schleswig rebelled, hence why there was a war over that. This time, Schleswig would join the German state, as the rebellion would be successful, according to the video title. This would leave us with a German state looking like this. Going down south to the Italian states, they would also successfully unify. It all started in Palermo, Sicily, which had been ruled by the House of Bourbon. The Italian nationalists hated that and created their own independent state, which unfortunately lasted for only 16 months. The constitution during that 16 months was quite advanced, liberal and democratic for the time. There was also a proposal for a unified Italian confederation of states. This is the birthplace of the revolution in Italy, but practically all states in the Apennine Peninsula rebelled against their monarchs, except maybe Tuscany. For example, 2 months after Sicily rebelled, Austrian-occupied Italian parts also rebelled against the Habsburgs, creating the Republic of San Marco. Milan, Sardinia-Piedmont and the Roman Republic all had the same idea in mind, but were opposed by the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, the Papal States, Tuscany and the Austrian Empire. This time, Austria would be way weaker due to Hungary also winning their revolution, but I'll go over that later. So, the Italians would have a good chance of unifying. The First Italian War of Independence also happened while all of these rebellions were ongoing, and it saw Sardinia-Piedmont going against Austria, who was supported by France. Historically, Sardinia-Piedmont was defeated, but again, with a weaker Austria, the opposite would happen. As a result, Sardinia-Piedmont can become the main unifier of Italy, just how they did historically. You can assume that the constitution that was written in Sicily would be applied to the whole country. It's time to address the elephant in the room, Austria. The Galician uprising is important to address, so I'll start with that. Greater Poland would also be rebelling at the same time, so they can coordinate with Galicia and form a unified Polish state after the war. This is why I think the Galician uprising would also be successful. As for Hungary, they're the star of the video. The Hungarian Revolution was the longest out of the bunch in Europe, and it only ended when they were crushed by the Austrian and the Russian armies. Yes, Russia pretty much put it down, as Nicholas I sent 300,000 soldiers to pacify the region. When the uprising started in Buda and Pest, which back then weren't unified to form Budapest, the rebels gave the imperial governor a list of 12 demands, which were accepted. They included for Hungary to become pretty much independent. They would technically be still under a personal union, but they would have their own army, bank and etc. So they wouldn't rely on Austria at all. Hungary was causing Austria a lot of trouble, but they were still fighting between the two sides. Hungary claimed Transylvania and wanted their nation to look like this, but there is a massive problem in that. This is all the minorities, which were many: Romanians, Serbians, Croatians, Germans, Austrians, Slovaks, just to name a few. Since all the revolutions at the time were about creating countries in terms of their language and identity, Hungary can never succeed if they keep claiming these boundaries. Historically, Serbians did rebel in Vojvodina, so they, together with all the minorities, supported Austria, as they didn't want to be part of Hungary. Although this video is not the most realistic, Hungary to break free like that would be a stretch. For them to also give up some territories is also a stretch. It becomes really difficult for Hungary to win their war, without doing any compromise. Such compromise wouldn't be popular in Hungary, so a solution to this problem would be very hard to find. My best suggestion is that Hungary manages to win against Austria quickly. This is possible as Austria just lost in Italy and the morale of the soldiers would be at an all-time low. After Hungary is victorious, they would most likely lose some lands to Serbia and Wallachia, which would later form Romania, uniting with Moldavia. The remainder of Austria, just so they avoid losing Bohemia, would become known as Austria-Bohemia, but the popularity of the monarchy is not that high. Spain is the last nation that was affected by the revolutions, that I haven't mentioned so far. I mentioned that they had a brief civil war where the liberals and the Carlists engaged in a conflict. The Carlists were defeated, but this time, for the sake of this video, I say that they are victorious. This means that Carlos Maria Isidro would become the ruler instead of Isabella II. This is a minor change that would maybe matter later on in the video. Overall, these are the borders after all the 1848 revolutions have been successful, and I gave you a brief explanation on how these could have happened. Now let's see how the continent would change. While a unified Germany and Italy looks scary, they have little ambitions of expanding their borders, at least not initially. France would be ruled by Napoleon III, but he wouldn't participate in many conflicts. Literally all the wars that Napoleon III was involved in wouldn't happen. For example, the Italian Wars of Unification. Maybe the Crimean War starts and it's very much altered, but I will explore that later. The strongest countries in Europe would be Britain and Russia, with the Ottoman Empire and France not being so far behind. We have created many unstable borders, so right after that, I would assume that many conflicts would start. For example, Poland would seek to take the Polish majority lands in Russia, or Russia would seek to take the Polish lands. Either way, the two countries would find themselves at war. Considering that historically, Russia was able to spare 300,000 soldiers to help Austria against Hungary, these soldiers would be used in Poland. I would say that the Poles unfortunately have 0% chance of winning, as they just got formed and had to fight the mighty Russian Empire. Poland might be propped up by the Germans who would wish for a buffer state and even threaten with war. I would assume that Russia would do a slight compromise where they would give the Poles their territory, but a Russian nobleman would be put in charge in Poland, who would be loyal to the Tsardom of Russia and not to the Polish people. This would effectively turn Poland into a Russian client state, but at least they would be unified. The Ottoman Empire, who would by that time have some control over Serbia and Romania, would start pushing for further integration. I don't rule out the possibility of them also invading the Greeks, as nobody could oppose them, but I don't know if they even wanted to do that. Russia and the Ottoman Empire would verbally agree that they dislike each other, but instead of dying on the front lines, they would expand their influence in Europe. Russia would have an interest in the new German state and the Ottoman Empire would have an interest in the new Hungarian state. Britain would also be in a much stronger position, at least in the continent of Europe. I assume that they would have good relations with France, as Napoleon III wanted to ally with them. This would mean that Britain and France would intervene and help the enemies of Russia and the Ottoman Empire. Since we're already going down a very unrealistic path, let's not pretend that this is possible. I'll throw realism in the trash and craft the most interesting scenario possible. The Ottomans, if they don't expand into Greece, they would for sure go for Hungary and Austria-Bohemia. Their vassal states of Serbia and Romania would be even further integrated and suppressed, and would be promised territory in return. Romania would be allowed to get all of Transylvania, and Serbia would get all the Slavic lands in Hungary and Austria. This arrangement would work temporarily well for the Ottoman Empire, as they would gather the full support of their vassals. The Ottomans would have a large army, but as per usual, they would be poorly equipped and poorly trained. This means that fewer Hungarian soldiers can hold the line, due to the Ottomans being so dysfunctional. I would predict that Hungary would be the first victim of Ottoman aggression, as Serbia and Romania would demand war. This is because these nations are claiming Hungarian lands and they would be determined to fight. This would however expand the Ottoman sphere of influence. In this hypothetical war, we can assume that the Ottoman Empire is quickly going to be victorious, as Hungary stands no chance. There is a possibility that the Hungarians request help from Austria-Bohemia, but this wouldn't turn the tides of the war. The conditions that allowed the Ottoman Empire to rise in the first place are here again. The Ottoman Sultanate used to be a small state in Asia Minor, but expanded due to conquering smaller neighboring states. Bulgaria and Byzantium were busy fighting each other, which allowed for the Ottomans to conquer them easily. The same applies to this situation, where Austria would be divided and made weaker, as both Austria and Hungary would be fighting against each other, getting weaker in the process. As such, the Ottoman Empire would have no trouble to conquer all of Hungary and expand their vassals. This would unfortunately for the Ottomans result in a coalition to form against them. In this alternate timeline, I don't think that Russia and the Ottomans would engage in war. As I said earlier, they would for now take advantage of a weaker Europe, rather than to fight each other. As a result, the Crimean War I think wouldn't happen. After all, the Russians and the Ottomans were at war in the Crimean War, and I don't think that such war would happen in this timeline. I think that it's very possible for France and Britain to form a coalition against the Ottoman Empire, trying to reduce their size. Italy is also possible to join for the same reasons as to why Sardinia-Piedmont joined the Crimean War. This coalition would want to contain Russian and Ottoman aggression, who both have conquered many lands since 1848. Russia would be hard to reach, and for the coalition to land in Crimea, they would need the Ottoman Empire to be on their side, which wouldn't happen. As a result, Russia won't be invaded, but the Ottomans would take their place as the punching bag. The Ottoman Empire would stand little chance against this massive European coalition. But why would the coalition invade the Ottomans? What do they have to gain from this? Well, they simply want to contain the Ottoman aggression, and they hope to prevent them from reaching Vienna. Since the Crimean War was fought on a peninsula, I thought that it would be very fitting for this war to be fought on another peninsula, the Balkan Peninsula. To cut the Ottomans down in size, the coalition is hoping to liberate the Ottoman vassals together with Bulgaria. This war would happen in 1853. It would be called the Balkan War, as most of the fighting would happen there. The coalition would announce their ambitions to cut the Ottomans down in size and liberate their European minorities. As a result, Greece would also join this alternative invasion of the Ottoman Empire, as they have all to gain from this. I think that it would be fair to say that the Ottomans stand little chance. The Ottomans have a high army count, but they are very poorly trained and poorly equipped, so their numerical advantage means nothing. It's going to be hard in the beginning for the coalition, as they would have to fight in the mountains of Greece. Later, when Serbia and Romania switch sides, the Ottomans would crumble. The Bulgarians had many uprisings in the 1870s, but with the situation being the way that it is right now, they can rebel 20 years earlier. This means that many Bulgarian national revolutionaries will never take part of this revolution, as most would be just born in around 1853. With Bulgaria rebelling and seeing some success, they would have a say in the peace deal, and the Ottomans would be kicked out of Europe. This would allow for something really interesting to happen, which is Bulgaria would be liberated 20 years earlier. While this would seem insignificant, let me tell you why it matters. All the Ottoman vassals would be completely freed and expanded slightly. As for Bulgaria, they would gain a lot of land, similar to San Stefano borders after the Russo-Turkish War of 1878. France and Bulgaria historically rejected the borders of Bulgaria, because Russia was seen as the liberator of the Bulgarians, and they put a Russian nobleman to rule Bulgaria. The nephew of the Russian Tsar was installed as the Prince of Bulgaria. France and Britain didn't want Russia to have access to the Aegean Sea, and for them to have a strong subject in the Balkans, so they reduced the size of Bulgaria drastically. But in this alternate timeline, France and Britain would be the liberators, so they can align Bulgaria and give them many lands, including Constantinople. If you ask why don't they give these lands to Greece instead to secure an ally, it's because it makes less sense to do that. As Bulgaria was just liberated, France and Britain can put a British monarch from the House of Saxe-Burgota in charge of Bulgaria. The House of Saxe-Burgota later got renamed to the House of Windsor. I'm telling you so you don't get confused. As a result, Britain can have a lot of influence over the new Bulgarian state, instead of Russia, which happened historically. This is why the Bosphorus Strait would be awarded to Bulgaria, rather than to Greece. This would allow for Britain to control Bulgaria and in turn the Bosphorus Strait. Greece on the other hand can object to unrestricted British access, but Bulgaria, considering that they would be ruled by a British nobleman, won't do that. This would result in Russia to be cornered and Britain to beat them to the punch to control the straits. Now, to be fair, this is a bit optimistic. I'm Bulgarian and I think that them controlling Constantinople, which would get renamed to Tsarigrad, is a bit too extreme. There were barely any Bulgarians living there, so their claim is very weak. It's entirely possible that Russia intervenes to save the arrival of the Ottoman Empire, but this is very much out of character for the Russians, so I doubt that. France and Britain now control the straits, so their influence in the Black Sea would grow and they would counter Russia. I doubt that Russia would just sit idle while all of this was ongoing, so they can secure some gains from Sweden or Germany, while the coalition is fighting against the Ottomans, but this one I cannot predict. I went on a bit of an unhistorical path, but I hope you got to see an interesting scenario, where the Balkans would be liberated by France and Britain instead of Russia. If the revolutions of 1848 were successful, this would result in France and Britain to get stronger, and Italy and Germany would follow in the later years. I think that all of these revolutions succeeding don't favor Austria, Russia and the Ottomans at all. This is because these countries included many minorities within them, who wanted independence, unlike France and Britain. I suggest you take a look at this video where France invaded and puppeted Mexico in 1861. Does this move make it possible for France to resist the Prussian invasion and the formation of Germany? There is only one way to find out. I hope to see you there. Thank you for watching and I wish you to have the best day possible.